Hey, gang, and welcome back to the Taking Chances podcast, episode number 5. I've got a very special and I would say probably the most unique individual that's ever been on the show today. Coming in live from Denver, Colorado, I got Ryan Smith, full-time arborist, does tree work. Ryan, I don't even know how to introduce you, man. We were just covering this in the back. I think we just hopped right into a conversation, getting caught up. I'm excited to hear more about you. I'm excited to hear more about what's been going on. But how have you been, brother? What's new in the woods?
Been good, weather's, spring in the Rockies. It's starting to turn some days, and some days it's still winter. Yesterday was blustering cold, but, sunny. That's always nice. So things have been good on that front.
I've seen that. We're still headquartered out of Colorado, so I know that the weather changes there a little bit more than it does in Romania. Talk to me a little bit about so your fitness is one thing that I've always been phenomenal of, and Ryan, I know so many stories about you that makes you unique, but talk to me a little bit about what tree work is, I guess, because I think for a lot of folks, even if I say arborist, even before we started this, I was asking Ryan, is the act of being an arborist called arboring? And we didn't know. So maybe take a few minutes just to explain to everybody it is kind of, I think, how you've earned your income, because to me, the endeavors that you're now in with photography, I think that gave you a really unique foundation that most people couldn't even imagine.
Yeah. You'd think being a professional in my field, I would know if there's a verb for being an arborist, but I just say tree worker, It's been a long journey in that way. I started in the field as just a ground worker, just a job, paying the bills as you will do.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the years went on, just was excited by climbing trees, because that's a very fit endeavor. I enjoyed the work, enjoyed just the fitness of climbing up trees, climbing down trees, climbing around them, all that, running saws. But then as time went on, there's the science behind trees with like proper cuts, pruning them or removing them.
So you find yourself a little bit kind of got into it for monetization, maybe at first. Not that monetization is right, but did that kind of build in a natural curiosity of what the hell are these things I'm climbing and cutting down and kind of that?
Yeah, exactly that. You got into it to pay the bills, and then it just turned into a passion. And yeah, it just blew up from there. The rabbit hole goes very deep.
Well, and I think, I don't know if I've ever asked you this, Ryan, and it's one of the things I love about having conversations specifically with friends is we know so much about each other, but do you ever really interview someone? What came first? I mean, did you discover climbing first, and did that lead you to being an arborist, or did you start to do tree work? How did you turn into a human fucking monkey, basically? Because for me, you had to help me. That took a lot for me to face my fears, and we'll get into that later. But for you, I just I just always assumed that you came out of the womb and just climbed up the wall. But how did it start for you?
Climbing came first. Started that in my early 20s. I was just 22 years old. There was a rock climbing gym back where we come from, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and one of my buddies said, "You need to go to this because I see the other things you're doing, and you're gonna love it." And I said, "Okay, yeah, whatever." I'm not a big gym goer, big outdoors guy, as we'll know, but went there, and there was really no turning back. That was day one, just hooked.
And it hooked you right out of the gate.
Yeah, so I took that and I moved to Colorado because Rocky Mountains, lots of climbing. And just happened to fall into the tree industry, and I get to climb for a living. I get paid, like that.
So interesting too. So you kind of discovered a passion about climbing and a natural affinity to it, I would say. And I've never asked you this before. So the arboring, whatever the hell we call it. Sorry for all the arborists out there that yell at Ryan, not me, but I'll take the blame for it. So you got into this passion because it's very similar for me too, man. And even though I'm not nearly as good at you, I try to pretend, and it's taken me to so many random places. But your passion that you took a chance on led into also a business endeavor, and I know this as well. But let me just ask you to kind of start the conversation. How many times have you hitchhiked across the United States, like not actually pretending like Forrest Gump, but how many times have you hitchhiked coast to coast?
Well, only once from Colorado to the East Coast. I never went the Pacific, but from Pennsylvania to Florida. So I guess, that's the Gulf Coast.
Gulf Coast, yeah.
Essentially. So twice, and then just about every country I've been in, which isn't a ton, but every country I try to throw a thumb out and just kind of get a ride to wherever I'm going, which is just fun. It's a good way to get to know people.
Well, I just think I agree with you. And I think what I want to try to pull out from this conversation as well is just your natural ability to have what I would call a sense of adventure. But I think for guys wired like you and myself, it might not seem like adventure. I think you just like, hey, this seems interesting and I'm going to do it because I can. But that is like ultimately the kind of freedom that I'm trying to help a lot of people discover that you can do, you know, because I followed you, even though you and I haven't seen each other since my ACL tear. I've been keeping tabs on you via social media, via your posts. And I know that, you know, again, I would say through this pandemic, you came out a stronger person through the lock-in, through the lockdown, you know, and you and I make some of the funniest memes about out there, making some comical things about what the world is. But I just think that's fascinating to me. Like, how did you have the courage? What was the reason when you first hitchhiked? Like, so what was the first time that you hitchhiked anywhere? And what was the reason behind it?
I used to know a guy, he's unfortunately passed away, older guy, that back home, back in Wilkes-Barre, who I had just moved back from Georgia. And me and him were at a coffee shop, got into a conversation. He's like, hey, you ever hitchhike, brother? And I'm like, no, you know, my mom said the only two things she doesn't want me to do are that and pick up hitchhiking. Obviously, I didn't listen to her very well,
failed.
but he was like, you should try. And I was like, yeah, cool. That sounds like a good idea, you know? So I just did it. I went out one day. I'm like, I'll hitchhike up to like Scranton, you know, 15-minute drive away. And I did. And it was something I was like, wow, that's kind of cool to know, like, you don't really need to buy a bus ticket or have a car to get somewhere. And it might take longer. Maybe there's more danger. I've never had a problem, you know.
We'll dive into that
I
a
guess
little bit too.
fit-looking white male. You know, I always use that as a caveat. Fit-looking white male, maybe there's a little bit of an advantage in that regard, but nobody's ever tried to take advantage of me. Well, I've been offered a lot of drugs, so I don't do drugs, but that's the only thing.
Well, and I think it's just, I think it gives you such a, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think it gives you such a more unique perspective on what humanity is. And I know that from traveling to you, Ryan, because you and I have been all over the planet. And again, even when I came to Romania, like my family members reaching out and like being concerned, and it's like, I've never been to a safer place, honestly, in my life. But at the same time, the only places I've ever felt in danger in my life are in my own country. So I just think it's this adage that we have as Americans too, of like, which I don't understand because we're so fucking bold as a culture, but we're so insulated around so many subjects. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, there can be, you know, however many forms of like whatever you want to be today or whatever's going on in society. But like when it comes to transportation or taking a risk or like taking an opportunity on yourself in business, or to like step outside the box of what a norm is, like maybe hitchhiking or getting into climbing, doing, you know, skydiving. I think any of those things kind of get outlandish to our culture in the West when it doesn't seem as crazy once you step outside of our country. But it's always been fascinating to me as an American citizen, the things that we sweat and the things that we just don't worry about at all. You know, and I know that you've probably seen some of that when traveling as well.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I could probably talk for hours on that subject, but to keep it brief, I think you're absolutely right. You know, whenever I go to Latin America a lot, pretty much exclusively, we'll say the Caribbean and Latin America. Jet lag sucks. I don't get any down there.
I feel like
and generally every time I go, I get somebody I know mentioning, oh, isn't it so dangerous? You know, you hear about, you know, whatever news you watch, you hear about crime, this and that. And I always have to tell them, America's the roughest room I've been in. I think the town I grew up in is one of the roughest places around. You know, it's a poor area. People want to fight. People,
it's very unique,
you know, have hard living. You know, even Denver, it has its spots, but I don't even find Denver too bad. I guess it's getting a little worse, but you know, growing up, I guess, the way I did maybe makes everything else seem a little bit slower, seem a little bit easier to deal with. But once again, places I've been like Honduras, Guatemala, people like to think they're dangerous, and I've had nothing but positive interactions. Nobody's threatened me, you know.
You've been welcomed with open arms, I'm sure, just as I have in like 99% of the places I've been. And even to touch on that too, Ryan, because I know you and I spoke, we had some complications, I would say, this time in Costa Rica, but not real complications with like the culture. We're the first people down there after the pandemic opened up, you know, so like just some complications that should be expected when 90% of your revenue comes from tourism and you didn't have tourism for 2 years. But in full transparency, man, like I'd love to dive deep on a lot of these subjects with you because for me, and, I'll say this to you, and I'm sorry we're doing it on the air. I have always found you to be one of the most fascinating individuals that I've ever met. And with all the travels I've done and talking to top CEOs, just the level of confidence that you have in your endeavors, but also like walking like a samurai of doing no harm to others, because I would say you are probably one of the boldest humans I've ever met. But I say that like with the most love of where you don't really upset people because you're not really trying to influence other people, and that's always been fascinating to me is like, you've always marched your own march. You've kind of done things by your own accord. And I think it's, I've seen you grow so much in the 5 or 6 years that I've known you in that process. But I think like you said something just now that sparked to me, and like all these folks I've talked to, you've got some kind of foundation, and unfortunately, especially in the West, most of our foundations that make us successful didn't come from a lot of good, and I'm not saying like we don't have to dive into it, but like, my upbringing was great, but I would say I made a mess of my own life kind of in business, and I had to fix that. But like in that process of me unraveling and putting myself back together, even with the surgery I just had, that's what's kind of made me a dangerous man is like, I almost had to be a complete fuck up and not really buy into myself to be like, okay, this takes almost the same amount of effort to be like really successful, and just this one's a little bit easier for me. And I don't know if any of that's resonated with you, but like, talk to me a little bit about, have you ever even thought about that, Ryan? Like how different it is that you'll just, because I know like once arboring comes to a close, you're like, I'm just going to go pick some place in head and go check it out. Have you ever honed in on how unique that is? Like, and again, I'm putting you on the spot because Ryan hates to talk about himself, and we're going to get into that subject next, but have you ever just sat and been like, I'm a little different than the people around me, and I wonder why?
Once again, you nailed it there. I try not to think that way because I think everybody's got their own uniqueness, and maybe they're afraid to embrace it because, people are judgmental. Right. And as you grow older, maybe you learn to not care. I don't know. That's kind of my
Me
deal.
too.
But, sometimes more people I've spoken to, I've been kind of told that, and it's cool. I just, like you said, I do what I enjoy doing. And I think everybody should do that. If you have a thing you really like and, if you can monetize it, that's fantastic. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination wealthy, like still trying to maybe buy a house or something, that's the hard part out here.
But I also think wealth, Ryan, not to interrupt you, I think wealth is a term that needs to be redefined in the West right now too. And I think to me, I think you're one of the most successful people I know because I think you're one of the happiest people I know, bro. And I mean that. I talk to so many CEOs that maybe they have like 8 times the revenue I do, but if they're miserable, I just don't understand the point. So I've looked up to you since I've known you. Sorry.
I appreciate that. No, that's kind of the thing I'm getting at. I think you have to really like what you do. And I know that's not easy for everybody. Like I said, I started with this career just paying the bills. It was enjoyable. I got to be outside all day, and I wasn't climbing trees at first, just, pulling brush, just, hard work as it still is, but enjoyed the process and enjoyed what I was doing enough to stick with it, and then discovered, oh, this goes a lot deeper. And now, I tell everybody, hell, more than 4 out of 5 days a week. We'll say if I were to work 7 days a week, 6.5 of those, I enjoy what I do. And I think that's important. It's not always the easiest thing to find. It took me until I was like 30 to really figure out like, oh, I'm going to stick with this. And I'd already been in it a couple of years, but then I was like, I'm going to really go further.
And talk to me about how that developed, because I didn't mean to interrupt you at the first round. I just wanted to give people a little bit better framework of, what arboring was, but how I understand, because for myself, like it's weird. Some of the things I get curious about, right? Because maybe I didn't think I was that passionate about it to start off. But it's almost like, and I know I love the book, The Alchemist. So like kind of following that passion, it's almost like the universe pulls you through towards what you're supposed to be doing. But how did that evolve for you? Like, so you started to talk about the curiosity with trees, and I know that started some of your education, but just to get into this, like there's some layers of education you need to keep safe, right? Because what you do is, let's be honest, is very potentially dangerous.
It is, it's mitigated danger because you learn better how to, say, set anchors in trees, better how to read a tree, what should I set an anchor on? But yeah, the evolution of that was, we'll say 50-50 accidental, 50% accidental, 50% like purposeful. 50% of the accidental was when I first started climbing trees. I was terrified, even though I rock climbed for a number of years.
I love hearing that you were afraid once. Keep talking to me about this because I didn't think it had.
I feel like, there's always a bit of fear with things, but you just kind of like, you've been here before. That's the way I take it. But yeah, going back to that, I was terrified. Then I learned to trust the equipment I was on, learned how to trust the trees I was in or read the trees I was going to get into, things like that. Just, like you will do with anything, learn more. And, now I'm not saying there's not a thing I won't climb, but there's very few. I look up at trees I got in years ago that I was like, ooh, shaky until I finally kind of got my feet under me in the tree. Now I look at them, I'm like, oh, that's not really a big deal. It's just, the experience level goes up. And like I said, a lot of my attitude towards anything, but towards tree work especially, is, oh, I've been here before and I got through it, so I'll do it again. That's just kind of my attitude toward it. And that part of the evolution was part accidental, getting forced into situations that maybe I didn't want to do, but had to. The business I used to work for, it was just me and the owner. And when everybody left and he got hurt, I'm the only guy left to climb trees. So guess you got to do it.
So kind of,
got to make.
And did that force you into some new endeavors that maybe you weren't comfortable with at the time, but you're kind of like, look,
absolutely,
like who else is here? Like, who am I going to call? So I guess my ass is going up there.
It was both, like I liked working for him. We're still friends. I just work for another business now and have, one of my own that isn't very big, but do my own thing occasionally. But yeah, it was like, I wanted to help him out, be the best employee I could be, the best friend I could be, but also, this is what I know how to do. I'm not going to try to go anywhere else. So get up there and do it. And it built a lot of confidence. Maybe some of it was stupid, but I've learned lessons since then. Yeah. And now it's like mitigated risk, as I say. People might see it as dumb, but I get up there and I'm like, no, I'm safe. I'm fine.
Well, I love that. And Ryan, I got to share this with everyone too, because I talk about facing my fears so much. And if anyone's seen me actually scared shitless in person, it's definitely this guy I'm talking to. I mean, Ryan, I just remember a couple climbs that were probably like, even me looking back after skydiving, some of the first climbs I was on with you, like I'm almost embarrassed to even think about how I acted because like I respect you so much. But at the same time, I have the confidence of knowing like, when you built that confidence in, because I remember I'd be on some climbs with Ryan that were, let's just be honest, top rope, like less than 50 meters. When I'm first trying, like I got the shaky legs and Ryan's like, down belay and basically falling asleep, waiting for me to face my fears, but still giving me encouragement, and I think that was the biggest thing for me. Yeah. That's the biggest thing for me, Ryan, is like, I kind of came in as like a badass athlete and I knew what I could do like in the mats and I knew what I could do in a boxing setting. So it was weird for me to be like so humbled by something, but that's what drug me towards it too. It's like, I know I'm a badass over here, but in this subject, I feel like I'm just a little baby, but everything you just said, man, I resonate with all of that so much, from me facing my fears and kind of attacking that. It wasn't really attacking the fears, but it was just, and my first guide I worked with just taught me about moving fear into respect, so just transitioning it a little bit and saying, hey, don't ever lose that fear. And I would say this, Ryan, I really think that the worst injury I had in skydiving was after a weekend of, I had around 100 jumps, but it was the first weekend where I don't want to say, that's a lot. Yeah, I don't want to say I disrespected it, Ryan, but I was definitely getting comfortable for the first multiple jumps in a row. I mean, dude, there's so many times I drove up to Longmont, Ryan, and I had my gear and I'd have like 50 jumps, but if I wasn't feeling it, I wouldn't get in the plane, but like, honestly, from doing work with you, I think if I didn't get into climbing first, I know this, there's no way I would have skydived, so it was kind of a natural progression of me just attacking my fears, but a lot of what I got out of,
sorry to interrupt. I remember you telling me that you're like, I'm going to get over this fear of heights. I'm going to jump out of planes. And I'm like, well, that's a good way to do it.
But what you said to me, like, I just remember, and I was thinking of you so much in this day because I was up near, oh my God, I'm going to call it wrong. Is it Dinosaur Park by where the knife's edge? So I went up there with my friend Roots doing some climbing. I did a route with you there the one day. It's when I was the most afraid. So it was, yeah, I might be calling it the wrong thing. So
Estes, up that
when
area?
We hiked up through the back there and we were doing that climb, that iconic climb. I've got the photo. I'll link to some folks after this. But I just remember that day of how, like, I'd been climbing with you for a little bit, but the fear still got to me a little bit that day. And it was a climb that I felt like in the gym I would have crushed. And I just had started skydiving. So But like when you said you look back at some of those trees you climbed, and it was so weird. It took me about 15 jumps, but like I can't say my fear of heights was killed by that, but my respect for the gear in climbing was completely founded from skydiving, which is like, I know a crazy thing to say, but when I started to learn how to pack my chute and I learned like how many ropes there are and how honestly simple that system is, I'm like, are we really jumping out of the plane with like a little baby parachute that pulls out my big parachute? And these are the only harnesses and just these stitches. But then it forced me again with education, Ryan. And this is really what I want guests to take away from here. I don't know how many people that listen to this are climbers or skydivers. And I'm not saying to get over your fear, do you have to climb or jump out of a plane? But I think in building respect, from what I'm hearing Brian say, is like, hey, I started to do these things. I built a foundation of education in there. From there, I got to make the decision if I wanted to monetize this or make it a hobby. And my argument for that would be, I think if you take that approach with anything in life, that is literally the pattern for success. If I'm going to start off in jiu-jitsu, if I'm going to start off in kickboxing or any endeavor, embrace the fact that you're going to be an infant in that in the moment. Do the work to become educated and hopefully mitigate that risk, and then wash, rinse, repeat. But if you follow those cycles in anything that you're, and again, Ryan, you said it again, that you're passionate about, because if you don't have that passion, you're not going to wake up every day and try to get better at your trade. And I just find you so unique, Ryan, too, because again, like, even though climbing got you into something that's kind of correlated for business, that endeavor for me of facing my fears really gave me the confidence to be in my own business now. And it has nothing to do with it, but it has every fucking thing to do with it. I don't know if that would resonate with you.
Yeah. No, it's all related. I think the big thing that comes to mind for me in that regard, you're starting something new, something caught your interest, and maybe it lasts, maybe it doesn't, but you're starting it and you're going to be bad at it, as we all should be, because being humbled is great.
That's another.
I like to think. I like to think, don't be afraid to look stupid, because we're all going to when we don't intend to. So do a thing intentionally, like, I'm going to look really bad. I'm going to look really dumb, because anybody who's anybody in that field, whatever it is, you could be knitting, you could be rock climbing, whatever it is, a good person in that field will be more of a mentor than make fun.
100%.
They'll look at you and say, hey, how about you try this? And I don't, like I said, I don't really go to gyms a whole lot, but whenever I've been in there, if somebody needed help, I don't like to impose, because, people get upset about that, and I don't think that's cool either, but I have no problem offering any assistance I can. With rock climbing, I've moved more into mountaineering endeavors,
Which
but that's 15 years of buildup where I know I'm very comfortable with my ropes and my gear, and I can look down a 2,000 foot cliff and be like, yeah, I've been here before, and it is what it is. But that took that many years. I mean, there were early years where it's like you get 20 feet off the ground and you're like, you're terrified.
Yep.
I've been there.
Yep.
And there's still days. There's still plenty of days. I had one last summer. I intended this big route in the Gore Range.
I remember you were texting me, I think right before, right?
I woke up at like 1:30 in the morning, and I said, you know what? Not today. Because some days you just got to know it's not the day to do it. I think that can be for most things. Obviously, if you got to go to work, you got to go to work.
Yeah.
You just kind of grudge through it. But I think in regards to dangerous endeavors, it could be with skydiving. You're driving up somewhere and you go, man, it's not there today. And you just got to not do it.
And
go do something else, whatever it is.
And to me, one of the things that's fascinated me, and God, this is a whole other, as soon as I say this, you'll know this is a whole other conversation for an episode itself. The climbing culture was very different for me, and the skydiving culture was very different from like most, I would say from like even MMA or from that, similar to competitive fighting. But what I mean is I know the climbing culture in Colorado has changed quite a bit, right? But to me, the culture that was kind of around those endeavors was so much more supportive than what I would see in like an average gym setting, and not to knock the average gym setting, but, I got so good at climbing right out of the gate, realistically, because I went to a great gym with far better climbers. And like you, I knew I was a badass in certain things. So I had the courage to just be like, hey, I suck at this. How the hell are you doing that? Like teach me, and just really mimicking and watching people's body patterns. And, for someone that doesn't go to the gym ever, I met Ryan through a chance encounter. We have a mutual best friend from the same town we grew up in. Never met each other in the same town. We actually met our first meeting was Ryan dropped me geo-targeted longitude and latitude points at a rock, and I was like, I can't wait to meet this guy in the woods because that was our first meeting was at a crag. But I just think
I can only see this guy in the woods. That says a lot about the attitude we have.
It really does. You know, I have a friend that Ian Poor that's a mutual friend of both of ours, and he's like, you got to meet this guy Ryan. And Ryan and I texted each other one time, and I was like, hey, I'm free today, and he's like, well, come to these coordinates. And I was like, and honestly, from that point on, I was like, I fucking love this dude. We also met Matt from Chalkstone. I can't wait to get Matt on eventually. You know, I don't know how much you guys have been staying caught up, but I think, that whole group, I gotta give so much thanks to you guys too, because I feel like you and I both moved to Colorado at different times, maybe from a different perspective at the time, but I think we both got out very similar things from our endeavor of getting out there. For me, and I don't want to speak for you, I was trying all these things, but I really feel like when I moved to Denver, stepped out on my own, like that was the location I actually became a man. I mean, like I had made enough mistakes. I had done a lot of good things, but I started to piece everything together out there, and it just felt like out there in the wilds of the Rockies and just, being a bit of a lunatic gave me the confidence that, hey, maybe some of these other ideas I have aren't as stupid as jumping out of a plane, so like
How old were you when you moved out here? You were like early 30s.
Yeah,
right?
so I moved out, and the time hop always blows my brain. So I actually moved out full time in 2016. I think when I was first out there exploring was 2015. So, I mean, I'm 41 today, and it's, so about 34, 35, give or take.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes I think about that too, because I moved out here in 2010. I was 24. Yeah, 24. And, I just moved out here. I was like, I'm just going to rock climb and dirt back. And like I said, I got a job in the tree industry, but it was a paycheck.
Mm.
It was nothing more than that. And like I said, around 30, I started taking that seriously. And sometimes I just wonder if, in our 30s, a lot of us who've had passions in life, even if the passion we have at 30 doesn't match with what we had at 20, we start putting them together. We start kind of solidifying what we want to do, whatever it is, or just solidifying our attitudes, ourselves. So like whatever we move into, it's like, that's my thing.
And that leads me right into the next question I want to talk about, because the other endeavor that you've got going on, and I think I think a really great skill set that you have, but I know that your passions are brought together. Talk to me about photography, and honestly, the West Side of Nowhere. Let me just say this. I don't want to take any credit for that, but I'm so freaking happy that like an idea you and I had on that hike where I think you said, you know what, Ryan's like 15 meters in front of me. He's like, you're like the Joe Rogan of the Rockies. And at the time, everybody, and you and I were just having a philosophical hike / like run through the woods of just getting to know each other. And that conversation for me kind of sparked me to get into this for a little bit. But, talk to me a little bit about the photography, because I've seen you kind of evolve into that, but it seems like, from afar, it seems like a bunch of your passions that's just been something natural for you to pick up as like the next step almost, right?
Yeah. When I moved back out here in 2013, I had a good friend back in Pennsylvania. He's like, hey, do you want a real camera? Because, you use your phones and they're good. I would never talk down. They can do a lot, especially nowadays. But I was like, yeah. And he sold me a cheapo Canon. I'm not going to get into the technical details, but a cheap camera that was better than it was a real camera. And, at first, a lot of my photos were just kind of, as you will in your mid and early 20s, like, hey, look at me, I'm in this cool place. You're just almost braggadocious.
Yeah.
Look I got out of the valley. Check out this place. And look at me, I'm rock climbing, or, whatever it is. And that's all cool. I like taking pictures of people doing that. I take a lot less of myself lately doing that too. Just because I'm on the other side of the lens. But yeah, over the years, that kind of evolved into like, hey, this is cool. This picture looks really good. Or I really brought out that landscape. And having friends in that field who are professional photographers, like do it for a living, get paid. They're like, man, you're doing really well. And, they maybe give me some insight, or they would, say, have you thought about X, buying a lens, buying a camera, whatever. And I'd say in the last, I don't know, pandemic brought out a lot for, I would think, a lot of people, one way or another.
Is that when you hopped into photography? I mean, I know you were taking a ton of photos before, but did you kind of really just take it serious then?
I would say 2018, late 2018, I really started thinking, because I went on my first real out of the country trip. I went to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria to like help out, and I was like, wow, what a beautiful place. And then I went to Norway in the winter because I'm an idiot, but
But it was a great trip, though, right?
to meet up, yeah, to meet up with a friend of mine, and then made some great friends. And I had this kind of cheapo camera, but more, real camera. And I was like, man, I could do better. And I didn't know enough about cameras and all that then to maybe take full advantage of that one. But then soon after, I got a newer camera. I started really focusing on, angles and lighting and this and that, all the technical details that would really probably make many people fall asleep if I got into here.
You've got an eye for it, though,
But
Brian. I mean, and this is, we're definitely going to show the website. I wanted you to talk about it a little bit, but I would argue that I think you've got an eye to capture a story just from a photo. I mean, some of the photos you've been posting lately, too, like, I know that you've been at protests in other countries, like just really capturing moments that would normally scare the hell out of people. But I think even from your photos and the level of detail, like, I almost feel like that those photos in themselves tell a story of what's happening in the moment, because I just feel the way that you've lived changes the way that you, like the lens that you're seeing the world through. So I think even like what you're choosing to capture is quite a bit different from most photographers. And I just want to share this with you, man. Like, I really think if you stick with this, whether you know this gentleman or not, I see you evolving like Jeff Johnson, someone that really had a documentary out there, and his photos are just, again, you and I've talked so much in the Rockies, and me just like looking at, I gave up on photography because I would be with Ryan and I look at this mountain and I would take a photo again off my phone. And Colorado was the first place where I just realized, man, I can't capture on this device like what this thing is that I'm looking at. And I feel like you can, though, and that in itself is just artwork.
I mean, I would never say people shouldn't
Yeah.
try it. Like, I feel bad if you stopped trying to do it because because sometimes it's fun. It doesn't have to be monetized, but I've kind of gone that way because I'm like, yeah, I guess I've been in some pretty decently cool areas, and landscapes are beautiful, but I've started going in other trajectories too, where I'm like, oh, I'm in this place. Like, what are the people about? So then you capture a picture of the person or the people, or the protest. In December, I was in a place called Dominica, which most people haven't heard of, and they think Dominican Republic,
Yep.
but this is a different island in the Caribbean. And it just so happened when I was there because it's a nature island, beautiful, jungles, mountains, Caribbean Sea, or Caribbean. I guess it depends how you say it. Anyway,
Tomato. I look at both.
yeah, as I was there was a gas shortage, and I didn't expect that. And, so like buses are running a little less. People are, a little more conservative, we'll say, with their driving around. They didn't drive conservatively.
Yeah,
Crazy
that's everywhere I've
driving,
been.
but it is what it
Yeah.
is. But then, one day the tanker arrived with all the fuel, and I just happened to be walking around as I'll do. And, I see cars lined up for, a mile or two down the road waiting for fuel. I see people lined up in droves with several gallon, gas tanks waiting to fill up. And I was like, I'm going to talk to some people. I'm going to get some pictures. Obviously, you try to make sure it's okay. You don't want anybody to think you're, just taking advantage of them. And, I was like, didn't expect to be here, but now I can capture this story. I could tell like the people were very nice, but it was a very intense moment because now they're getting fuel. So everybody's kind of like, I'm nice, but I need this
A little
thing
more aggressive
to,
probably in the moment, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, they're a little more aggressive, a little more yelling. I didn't, where I was, see anybody fighting, but, people are yelling. People are, hey, I'm here in line, whatever it is. And, the same went in Peru. Just happened to go down there, and there were protests going on against the government. I was like, hey, I was down there with my girlfriend. I was like, hey, there's a protest over here. I'm going to go in there. And she's like, okay, you do your thing. I'm going to hang out. I'm in the periphery, which is fine. And I'm in there.
That's
I'm
so
just,
awesome. She didn't
just
slow you down either. Just go do your thing.
white guy with a camera. And I'm like, hey, what's this all about?
How were you
And
received in there too, Ryan? Because and after this, just so for the folks that are listening, we're going to have some links to the photography. But I think all your photos are great, Ryan. But those are some of the ones where reviewing this before you hop down, I'm like, man, like whether it was the moment was so intense or you had the eye, but like I just really felt like you were capturing the moment. How were you received in those moments, though? Like, was anyone kind of offsetting to you, or
No, nobody seemed to mind. They had their thing they were focused on.
yeah,
They were like protesting. I got pictures of the police. They didn't seem to care. Pictures of protesters, spoke to protesters like, hey, what's going on? And I came across 3 protests while I was down there, and they were all different. They're all for different things, maybe interrelated, because post 2020, everything's a little bit different. And I just, what's this about? And knowing Spanish doesn't hurt, because I've noticed by speaking somebody else's language, suddenly they really embrace
do.
Even if it's a little bit.
Just attempting.
But thankfully, I'm right.
It's one of the biggest things I've learned.
So I was received, everywhere I've been. Haven't had an issue. If somebody didn't want a photo, they just say, no photo. Cool. I don't take a picture of them. And yeah, I haven't had any issues at all.
Where do you see yourself? Like, where do you think all this goes for you? I guess because we're going to hone in on one of the subjects we want to talk about. But where do you think this pulls you next? I mean, because I'm just curious for myself. Even screw the people listening to this. Like, I know that you got you're still doing the Arborist for others. I know that you've got the ability to maybe take this on your own eventually. I feel like the photography is something you're really falling in behind. But where do you think the next steps are? And not that you have to have them, but I also think, Ryan, like one of the things you're going to give to so many people is, a lot of the times when I've had this show, everyone's about business, and that's not me either. I think I've got to have enough of these too, so people understand like how balanced I try to live my life to have the freedoms. Because if I didn't jump out of a plane and go climb some shit, there's no way I could work as much because I wouldn't be as passionate about it either. But where do you think this goes next for you? I mean, where do you kind of see the natural progression of your life unfolding with photography? And I mean, do you think that's something that could maybe go from a passion to maybe the next step turn into something bigger for you?
I mean, yeah, I'm not too good at planning far ahead because I think that causes a lot of stress.
Yeah, it does.
But
it does.
I'm trying to combine both things I do, so my girlfriend is a nurse. She wants to get on the road to be a travel nurse. And I intend to get on the road at least with her a little bit. So I would like to be contracting arborist, climb trees or consult, whatever. But by being able to access, we'll say, parts of the world like the treetops, 99, no offense to anybody, 99% of the population couldn't maybe safely or comfortably settle themselves into a treetop with an anchor and, put themselves in a canopy any which way. And I've been experimenting with, taking my photography into that.
I like that
a little bit. If
natural setting.
Maybe if arborists or tree companies are like, hey, we want some photos for our social media or for our website. Cool, that'd be great. And then that combines my love of climbing trees. So my idea is to kind of put both together. I would like to get to. This might sound like disaster chasing or whatever, but I'd like to keep going to places where maybe there's a thing going on. Maybe there was an election that didn't go everybody's way and you're like, hey, I want to find out what your view is, because I don't think the news exactly gives you all the details.
I can promise you it doesn't, Ryan.
So I like talking, and I'm not saying like a journalist type. I wouldn't want to work for somebody, but it'd be cool to like talk to regular people. What's really going on? What do you think? And maybe, they only see so much because we all do. We're all limited. I get this person's perspective here, I get this person's perspective, and then it's like, oh, you hear on the news, oh, this, Honduras is so this way, and you're like, well, I've spoken to a dozen people, and it's not all that way, and here's what you don't hear, So I like that. I like that connecting, finding out we're all kind of the same.
I would agree.
And I'd like to take my photography in that way, where I get pictures of people like, hey, this person here that is going through a thing. They're not different than you, and you're just getting that story, the story behind the thing.
That's the biggest thing too, Ryan. And you said so much great stuff right there. And I think for me, that's the biggest thing I've learned as well from just traveling. I find it fascinating. So for me, taking chances is one part of a lot of endeavors of what I would call, for lack of a better freaking argument, is almost like me becoming an investigative journalist without me really wanting to be, because I'm with you at the same time. Yeah. I've been in so many places. Like I landed in Romania 2 days before the Russian invasion, and just like things that are frustrating me right now. Like I'm an American citizen in a NATO country. I'm waiting a year and a half, and most Americans don't realize this. Like our immigration policy, and this is not speaking like a Democrat or a Republican, is just so hogwash. We've got to update it. So, Anthony Blinken is here every other day. Not really every other day, but every other month. And we're celebrating exciting people in Ukraine and Romania to potentially be cannon fodder for what I would call as a proxy war. People don't want to talk about this, but how do we have a thing that's called, Article 5 of NATO, where our countries can commingle, but I have to wait over 2 years for some U.S. citizen to maybe look at some paperwork to just prove that her and I are in a relationship. So just certain things of like, America's number one. I hate to tell everybody, it's really not in a lot of subjects. And I say this loving my country more than anywhere else I've been. I've now been to 71 countries. It's made me appreciate America so much, Ryan. It's made me want to, I wish more Americans would be as respectful as you and I if they traveled outside of the seas. And I don't mean to Cancun for 5 days. And I don't mean to you know what I mean? Because there is a difference of, even me, I've gone to Costa Rica, and like you, Ryan, like most of my 30s were traveling through Central and South America. And honestly, just with Laura and I being engaged, my first trip to Europe has just been recent. So I've been, mind blown from the culture, So we went to Croatia, just seeing something that's from like 200 BC and an area that was impacted by Greece and then the Romans. And it's just so wild to me. But everywhere I go, this is a long way of saying I agree with you. I think people are so similar, and I've now, like, again, I'm definitely a capitalist, but I have debated communism with people who lived through communism with love and respect. It's just another system. I've debated socialism with socialists when I was in Central America with love and respect. And I think what scares me everywhere that I go right now is the second question I get from almost anyone, once they know I'm an easy American to talk to, is, brother, what is going on in your country, and how many people look up to us, and like our inability to have a conversation right now, especially at like a political level. And I know you and I don't care about politics, but I would say this: I left America caring a lot less about politics, hoping that this didn't spill over. And I just feel like, man, we're living through such a transition of time. But I'm with you. Like, I'm almost being gravitated. Like, I want to get to France right now with what's going on. I want to talk to some Paris folks. And I think, to me, like, this is a long-winded way of saying, like, even Ryan and I, with kind of similar backgrounds but very different, taking chances and putting all this together, none of this really has anything to do, or any of this conversation about my business, but it's just been a natural progression of meeting a lot of cool folks, not really agreeing with the normal narrative that's out there right now, looking back through history as I've traveled and say, maybe this narrative has been very controlled for a long time. And what else do we not really know about? Going to places of like, okay, why are we in Ukraine? Well, why is Romania in NATO? What did we do in the 1980s here? What did happen in Georgia? And there's just certain things, like, you and I don't care about the geopolitical scene. But for Americans, what I can tell you now is watching the news in Europe and then watching the American news. If you think that our media is not as controlled as Russia, you're out of your fucking minds. And I mean this. Buy a VPN for $12.99 for anyone listening to this. Put yourself behind anywhere in Eastern Europe, and then Google things like myocarditis, the Nord Stream pipeline, and just be prepared. Because be prepared that I think, Ryan, we're living in from all the travels I've made, I think the American dream is starting to turn a little bit into an illusion. And if folks like you and I that don't maybe elevate other stories, the narrative is going to be changed for us. And I think we've watched this for like 5 years. And I'm sorry for that tirade, but here's me saying we wouldn't talk politics in the long lead back in.
No, that's okay. I mean, kind of further elaborating on that, I think, how do I put this? It all, like you kind of touched upon it. It all kind of goes together. Like you said, if you didn't skydive, you might not have gotten the confidence to do your business, to take advantage of things you love. And that's the same with, you and I having traveled various places and talked to various people. Maybe we wouldn't have had that confidence if we didn't do other things. I think so too. X,
yeah.
Y,
it's hard to ascertain that too, right? Like, which came first? I don't know if I'd be doing this.
Well, and I like to think everything kind of goes together, even if they seem unrelated. Like you said, we had similar backgrounds, but different. But it all goes together and leads toward a thing. Like my upbringing was different than many folks. I'm not going to go further on it. It's not a painful subject. It's just a long subject.
I feel you.
But I think it built up certain things in me. And the more I look back, I say, I made mistakes. We all do. But thankfully, I got the lesson out of the thing and ran with the lesson. And over the long run, it's helped. And I think more people should, myself included some days, do that, where they have a bad thing happen or whatever, and you take the lesson and you go, okay, well, that thing's happened. I'm here now. What do I do? And that's been the constant lesson through my teens, 20s, 30s, is like, get hurt rock climbing. What could I have done different? Get hurt, running along anything, get hurt at work, or not even get hurt, make a mistake. I drop something on a fence. What could I have done different? And you take that, and this is just relating kind of work and play things, but anything in life, go to a different country, get, not taken advantage of monetarily, where somebody rips you off. You're like, well, I guess that's the price I pay. But what was the lesson I learned? Maybe
I love that, dude. I love that mindset.
Read a little more into a thing. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to
Well,
really. I don't have the words for it, but I think it's just putting everything relates.
Well, I think
and can help.
What you're saying too is like you've taken life lessons, but like you and I, and anyone I've talked to on the show or anyone that's successful, like we're not afraid to fail, and there's a lesson in the failure. And if you're willing to embrace it with humility and humbleness, whatever that lesson might have been in that failure, and really like try to educate yourself from there, because I mean, whether it's been a business endeavor, and like I said, I make mistakes every day. So I hope I never come off like I'm trying to be a perfectionist. I want to be the best that I can, but I just don't like move from mistake to mistake carrying a bunch of weight, and I try to coach my team on this too, is like, look, if you're going to make a mistake, let's make it in the right direction, going 100 miles an hour. And usually the overflow of that mistake is going to be some good things. Either going to learn something or education, or you're going to say, hey, I have to step back and redirect a little bit. But the only thing I know how to learn from is action, and I think that's what really frustrates me so much in today's age is I see so many very educated and wonderful folks. And it's almost like this paralyzation of fear to start something. And what it really humbles down to is like, I had this conversation with my parents the other day. I said, I really can't stand American politics anymore, but I got to tell you, the longer I've lived out of the States, I'm wondering if it's not just a reflection of how toxic we are to one another, rather than it's these outside politicians who are so bad. Because it's just, dude, it's been mind blowing to not be in the United States during right now. Because I still talk to Americans on a daily basis, but then I walk outside where everyone's Romanian, and again, they have their complications with one another. But I would say there's a lot more commonality here, and the general bullshit just doesn't exist in most countries that I've been to. UK has just as many problems. France has just as many problems. But a lot of countries I go to, and I don't mean to visit, I mean to like live in for a month to 2 months, I think the people are cutting each other a little bit more slack, and that's what I just want to come back to America. Like we got to support each other a little more, man. We've got 330 million people in the only intended immigrant nation that's ever existed, and we're all starting to scream cultural appropriation at each other when most people can't even point to where they're fucking from, like where their lineage is from, And like it's just that in itself is so asinine. And then you come over to like Ryan, same things here. When I go to Romania, like at first or in Costa Rica, and I buy an ethnic shirt and I'm trying to speak Spanish. Do you know how many people yell at me for cultural appropriation? It's fucking zero. They come up and love the fact that I'm a gringo trying to embrace a culture, and I'm actually trying to learn and let the places I go change me a little bit instead of trying to change the places I'm at. But no one has ever been offended. Like when I try to say vorbești engleză, I can only speak Romanian if I scream. So my fiance says, baby, enough people speak English. Stick to the Spanish. You got Spanish. Please stop screaming at my countrymen. So...
That's funny as hell.
But you know how it is too. Like,
I think what you said there with cutting each other down, and I kind of noticed the same. You go to places, and if you speak the language, eat the food, whatever, people are like, "Oh man, thank you," and they're thankful for you doing that. But what I like to tell people is, there's enough cake to go around. I don't think maybe this isn't a great business mindset. I don't know. I think there's enough cake to go around where you can compete, but you don't have to knock each other down.
No, I'm with you,
I
Ryan.
say this relating to the industry I know best, arboriculture, where there's a lot of companies that pop up every year. And I'm like, you know what? Some of those companies are going to maybe have a lower price because they don't have the overhead. Some are going to have a higher price. Plenty of work to go around for all of us, and I think that's most industries. You have, 8 billion people on Earth.
It's all industries, bro. Like, and I think you and I, whether you remember these conversations or not, I think that's been what I was trying to influence you on. I think when we first met, and I mean some of the first hikes we took, is like, hey, look, I am someone who embraces capitalism, but I'm trying to be the best person I can. This, like, money does not make me bad. I remember those first conversations we're having on hikes, and I'm saying, hey, I think we need more good people to be in this battle, because so many people are trying to influence without authority or without real influence, just from like screaming and bitching. And to me, that's the same thing. That's not taking action. That's not actually measurable and repeatable. But I'm trying to just live in a way that can hopefully impact some others. And I would say the way you look at that is great for business, because again, some real things we do. I give out so much information for free for recruitment companies because there's so many people that do it wrong. Like a lot of people doing things the right way. And ultimately, Ryan, I firmly believe in this. The only person that you're ever actually in competition with, regardless of how you look at it, is the person in the mirror, whether that's in climbing, fighting, playing sports. But if you wake up every day and I try to become a little bit better than that person in the mirror, I'm going to go beyond my wildest dreams. I know that. I've seen it in practice in so many endeavors. And I think, to your point, if you're afraid of making a mistake, you can't do that model. Like you can't enter that model with any fear. And even if you have the fear, you just kind of got to walk through it to let it subside.
You like take a step back if you have the fear, and you take a breath and you go, okay, like I said, I've been here before. Or even if you haven't been there before, you're like, well, something, you try to relate it to something you have been through or been in, whatever. That's kind of my attack. You go to a different country. Well, I've been to a different place before, even if it's in the US. I've been to a city that's totally removed from anyone or anywhere I know. So you relate it in that regard. Same with any business endeavor. I would like to think is the same thing. People who are more in that side of things that start businesses, like, well, I've started one before. Maybe it failed. What did I learn? Or
I got to tell you,
with climbing,
not even interrupt you, but I got to tell you how many times I've heard your voice in a business setting, or specifically when I was in a plane about to jump out. And just like, honestly, I can't remember this moment of when you climbed up next to me on whatever climb. And we're basically like, hey, you're either going to get moving or we're going to stay here all day. But I had like the leg shake going on. But that has been a moment of like so many random times in my life, even though I can't like identify what year that was and what climb it was on. I can go back and say, if I'm about,
think that was an,
I think it was the same time too. I think I've suppressed all those memories from that time. You're like, dude, like you're either going to stay here all day or you're going to start moving. But like what those are your two options.
Patience. Yeah, I had the patience. I was like, I'll stay here till it's dark. You're going to either get to the top or we're going to.
Yeah, you did.
We're not going to eat dinner.
So I've been in a plane where Ryan wasn't at. And like, so I'm looking at the door sitting in the back, right? Like one of the most unique things I wish, and you've jumped out of a plane before, but Ryan, I wish that those moments before the plane exit, I wish I could box that energy up and sell it to people. Cause dude, it's just, I've never felt so alive. Even talking about it, I start to sweat. But so many times I heard your voice saying the same thing to me of like, the door's getting closer. But again, just moments to what you've talked about of reflecting back to where this is so different than what I've done before, but it's so similar to like, I've been here before. You know what I mean? Like I've been in this kind of situation. So Ryan, look, I want to leave the fans with like, talk to me a little bit. We're going over a little bit on time, but talk to me about the photography website. I want to be able to make sure I get all these links down here. I know you don't celebrate yourself much on social, but that's where I'm going to come in. Talk to me about how can people find some of this great photography? I know you've got a new website you just put out.
Yeah. I always seem to forget the link to it because I am a fool, but let me pull that up. But
we'll
yeah,
go back and edit
I have my Instagram
Yep.
on the west side of nowhere where I put up, just general, as people will do on social media, pictures. But as the months have gone on, I try to make sure they're better and better and there's more of a story behind them. But then, yeah, the website, I built a website on a place called Smug Mug,
Okay.
which hosts photos, and it's just ryandosmithman.smugmug.com, because I don't know much about building websites and they're better at doing that. So
Beautiful. Well, it looks great.
pick
Ryan.
a design. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I'll work more with it. You can only have your hands in so many things at once, and web design is not something I really care enough about, but I'll learn enough to get better. Make it look better.
One of the things I think it looks great. And one of the things I love about this too is, and you're someone I hope I can talk to again. Like, yes, I hope I can get you to Romania. I hope the United States lets us back before you can get to Romania. I hope I'm flying back to Romania with you to climb the Carpathians, but however that plays out. Yeah, that would be great. I think you've got such a unique perspective on life, Ryan, that you're someone I'm going to have on a few times because number one, I want to really showcase that photography because I think you've had the courage to go to some of the most unique places. I know how you're wired. I think we're living through some crazy times. I think this might be round 2 of West Side of Nowhere, bro. Maybe when we first had this little idea, neither of us were ready, or maybe I wasn't ready. But I can tell you right now, I think there's going to be a lot of content for folks that want to go and tell stories in places where most people don't want to. So if you ever have me along, I would love to be there capturing some of those audio stories and video stories like you capturing some photos. But
I like that idea a lot.
I do too, man. I mean, and I feel like I can't do you enough justice, Ryan, on honestly one show because out of all my friends I have, you are the most close to the chest, and is what makes me love about you. But I think, the one subject we need to get on is I've seen you opening up a little bit. Maybe on these next ones we can dive in a little bit deeper, because there's so many folks that are talented like you, Ryan, too, that just, like the Alex Famazis of the world, that like you don't want to be famous and you don't want to be successful. I just think where the world's changed a little bit is like, unfortunately, you've got to put your story out there a little bit. And you're someone I've seen you starting to, even though like I know you hate doing it, I would argue I love doing this now that I'm doing it, but I was fearful of putting myself out way in this manner. But as I've watched you do that, I think I'm starting to see more of who I know you are from afar. And for me, someone that's been in your corner since the day I met you, that's so fucking unique, dude. And just keep going after it, bro. You've got a great way to look at the world. I appreciate you too, man.
Yeah.
Anything else you want?
We could sit here and talk for like 10 hours.
I know, and we will too. Is there anything big you want to leave the Taking Chances guests with? I'll get all your links over there in the socials. Don't worry if you missed any of that, but anything you want to leave the guests with?
No, I mean, I just lessons I've learned. I think what I like to get across to people, don't be afraid to be embarrassed or look stupid at something. If you really like it, just do it. You'll get better, and if you lose the passion for that thing, maybe, take a break from it and then come back and maybe get a new passion. But don't be afraid to look dumb, because we've all been there.
Wealth of knowledge from Ryan Doe Smith. I mean that, man. I love you so much for being on this. At the end of the day, guys, just embrace who you are and don't be afraid to fail. I mean, so much great content from Ryan. Thanks for being on the show. Stay tuned. We're going to have all Ryan Doe Smith's links linked below, and check out some great photography. And if the world is lucky, you might see Ryan and I in some very compromising positions very soon. Talk to you guys soon.
I hope so.
Thanks, guys.
See you later, brother.